welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're tackling something pretty vast and maybe a little unsettling, apeirophobia.
Yeah, it's from the ancient Greek apeiros, meaning infinite or boundless.
So the fear of infinity or eternity itself.
Exactly.
And this is especially for you, the listener, if maybe the thought of forever sparks, well, more than just casual curiosity for you.
Right. We've sort of immersed ourselves in some psychology resources for this one, pulled from places like The Atlantic, Exploring Your Mind.
Good sources.
Yeah, trying to get a handle on it. And our mission really is to understand what apeirophobia actually is. Maybe look at potential causes, how it links to bigger anxieties about, existence, death.
Without getting bogged down in jargon, hopefully.
Definitely trying to keep it clear, engaging for you.
Okay, so let's define it. At its core, apeirophobia is this intense fear of the infinite, of endlessness.
That's the heart of it. And it's not just a mild discomfort. Sources say it can trigger, well, significant anxiety.
Even panic attacks.
Yes, even full-blown panic attacks. What's interesting, too, is when it starts. Often quite early.
Like how early?
Adolescence, sometimes even before that. In childhood.
Wow. It really makes you wonder what kicks that off, doesn't it?
It does. It's not just some abstract idea making people uneasy. It's a real phobia with physical and emotional reactions.
And you mentioned the link to existential anxieties.
Yeah, that's where it gets fascinating.
Yeah.
Think about concepts like, say, heaven and eternal paradise.
Okay.
Or the opposite, maybe total oblivion after death, which is also kind of endless.
Right, an unending void.
Both are forms of infinity, and both can be deeply disturbing for someone with this phobia.
So it's not what the eternity is, good or bad, but just the endlessness itself.
That seems to be a key part of it, yeah, the sheer boundlessness.
And that brings us kind of naturally to another big fear, the notophobia.
The fear of death, absolutely.
It seems like they're often tangled together.
Very often intertwined, according to the resources.
It's almost like fearing the ultimate end and fearing no end are two sides of the same coin.
That's a great way to put it, that existential coin. If one feels overwhelming, maybe the other does too.
So this fear of apeirophobia, does it usually stand alone, or does it come with other baggage?
Good question.
Sure.
The sources suggest it rarely exists in complete isolation.
Okay.
There seem to be potential links or overlaps with things like generalized anxiety disorders.
Makes sense.
And maybe even obsessive-compulsive tendencies.
How so?
Well, think about how anxiety often grabs onto big, fundamental uncertainties. Existential fears.
Right.
So maybe this intense focus on the infinite is another way our minds are trying to grapple with the massive unknowns of, well, everything.
Now, we found an interesting perspective from Martin Wiener.
Yes, a neuroscience professor at George Mason University. He offers a slightly different angle.
What's his take?
Well, his hypothesis is that apeirophobia might actually be a specific form of a more basic fear.
Which is?
The fear of an unknown future.
Ah.
He draws a parallel to the fear of aging. Which, if you think about it...
It's kind of stepping into an unknown future, moment by moment.
Exactly. An endless series of future moments, each with its own uncertainties.
So the fear of infinity could be like a hyper-focus on the sheer unpredictability of time just stretching out forever, not having any defined end.
That's the idea. Less about the abstract concept, maybe more about the lack of boundaries, the uncertainty.
That reframes it quite a bit. It's compelling.
It is. Now, something important to note as we talk about this, apeirophobia isn't actually listed as its own specific phobia in the DSM-5.
Right, the big diagnostic manual from the American Psychiatric Association.
Correct. It doesn't have its own unique code or category.
But does that mean it's not considered a real phobia?
No, not at all. Our sources are clear on this. Even without its own listing, it absolutely meets the criteria for what's called a specific phobia.
Okay, so it is recognized just under a broader umbrella.
Precisely. It causes significant distress or impairment related to a specific trigger in this case, the concept of infinity or eternity. So it falls under anxiety disorders.
Got it. And I guess because it doesn't have that specific separate recognition, there probably isn't a ton of research focused just on apeirophobia itself.
That seems to be the case. The amount of dedicated scientific literature is still pretty limited.
Why do you think that is? Is it just too weird or too niche?
Well, maybe partly because it touches on such huge existential themes, It's not easily boxed in.
Sure.
And maybe its overlap with other anxieties like generalized anxiety or OCD means researchers have often studied those broader conditions instead.
But maybe that could change.
I think so. As we get better at understanding existential anxieties and how they show up, we might see more focused work on things like apeirophobia down the line.
So, thinking about you, the listener, if someone recognizes these intense feelings around infinity, what can they actually do? The sources said there aren't specific treatments just for this.
That's true. No apeirophobia cure exists. But the good news is that treatments for anxiety in general have been helpful for people experiencing this.
Like what?
Well, anti-anxiety medications can sometimes help manage the really intense physical symptoms that often come with phobias.
The panic, the dread.
Exactly. And then there's therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is mentioned quite often.
How does CBT help with something like fearing infinity?
It helps people identify the thought patterns, the core beliefs that are fueling the fear,
Okay.
and then challenge them, try to reframe them. It's about learning skills to manage that anxiety response, even when the trigger itself is this enormous abstract concept.
So it equips you with tools, regardless of the specific fear's focus.
That's the goal.
Right. Okay, so to help you listening connect even more, let's quickly run through some of the specific symptoms people report with apeirophobia.
Sure. The sources list several key things. Obviously, a significant fear of infinity itself.
And the related fear of dying we talked about.
Yes, that often comes up. Also, panic attacks that are specifically triggered by thinking about or discussing infinity or eternity.
Makes sense.
Some people report having really vivid, distressing dreams about infinity.
Wow.
There's also mention of derealization.
What's that exactly?
It's that strange feeling like your surroundings aren't quite real or like you're detached from reality.
Okay, I see.
And finally, symptoms that can look a bit like what's sometimes called existential OCD, becoming intensely preoccupied, almost obsessively, with huge questions about existence, meaning, reality, the universe.
So a whole constellation of related anxieties.
It seems that way.
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. We've learned apeirophobia is this really powerful fear of the infinite, the eternal. And it seems deeply plugged into our basic human anxieties about death, about the unknown future.
Yeah, those connections seem crucial.
And while it doesn't have its own neat little box in the DSM-5, it definitely presents as a real specific phobia.
Classified under anxiety disorders, yes.
Linked potentially to other anxiety conditions as well. And importantly, while there's no bespoke cure, standard anxiety treatments like CBT and sometimes medication can really help people cope.
That sums it up nicely. It's a complex fear tied to fundamental questions.
Which leads us to a final thought, really, for you, the listener, to maybe ponder.
Yeah.
Think about our own lives, which are finite.
Yeah.
How does this huge concept of infinity, whether it fascinates you, repels you, or frankly terrifies you, how does that idea influence the way you see your own life?
That's a deep one.
Right. How does it shape your perspective on the present moment, on finding meaning within the time we actually have? What specific part of the unknown future, or just the idea of endlessness itself, resonates most strongly with you?
Something to definitely sit with after this.